At this point, an interesting problem has been presented. It has to do with the relationship between the synoptics and the expanded parallel accounts such as the Acts of Pilate. The question ultimately is which came first, though it seems obvious that Form 2 of the Acts of Pilate either predates Matthew or was adjusted by the same author that wrote Matthew. That makes Form 1 a prior account. However, that doesn't mean that Form 1 is prior to the other synoptics, and unfortunately I have to explore that connection. Looking over my timeline, the biggest problem is Marcion's fixed date. I used 140 as a fixed date, however, that was only fixed to determine absolute priority. Assuming the Catholics are correct, the range of the Gospel of Marcion is about 20 years. It's from 120 to 140. However, there's a second problem with the dates of Marcion. The Gospel of Marcion is actually called the Gospel of the Lord, and even though Catholics claim he wrote it, that's not a given. The Gospel of the Lord may predate Marcionism. This is another important detail. The Catholics made up the story of Marcion's destruction of Luke. The dates simply don't follow, and neither does authorship. Pinning this debacle to Marcion could very well be an outright lie. Naming this text the Gospel of Marcion is Catholic fiction. And at this point, I will no longer be referring to this text as the Gospel of Marcion. I will be referring to it as the Gospel of the Lord. And I'm going to give a wide date range of 100 to 140. We do not have Marcion's authorship here. The Catholics tried to pin it on him, but that's all fictional, so there's no reason to believe Marcion wrote this book. This date expansion does not affect priority. The Gospel of the Lord has already been outright determined as the priority account for the four synoptics. And at this time, just because I want to give the Catholics a big middle finger, I'm going to say 110. I'm not even going to pretend that Marcion wrote this. Everything they've said about Marcion on this gospel subject has been a lie, so there's no reason to think Marcion wrote this text himself. We still have nothing on John at this time, but with John it is very clear that his philosophy is a version of one of the earliest understandings. This understanding lasted quite a while, so it doesn't guarantee early authorship. However, I'm looking for indicators that would put John somewhere near the earliest accounts. The philosophy is consistent with an early date, but that doesn't outright grant it. Also, at this point, even though I'm looking for priority, I'm also building packages. So with texts like the Gospel of James and Pilate Form 2 adjustments, the authorship date range is consistent with Matthew's author. In other words, the author of Matthew likely made adjustments to Pilate and possibly wrote the James account. These three will move around as a package if possible. The author of Pilate Form 1 is difficult to track. It may be related to the Mark author, however, it may also be related to the John author. At this point, it's difficult to say. One last thing, I'm going to be mentioning several early texts. This will revolve around Revelation, Philo of Alexandria, Plato's Republic, and perhaps a few Gnostic texts. Even though I have a lot of texts to add, early Christianity shows a split into 3 or more Gnostic groupings. And once you get into those groupings, a lot of light is shed on the New Testament inconsistencies. Within a few videos, we may be a lot closer to making a straight line connection between the birth of Christianity and Catholicism.